Started. It's my pleasure to welcome you all to this webinar today. So this is through the University of Minnesota's Data Science and AI Hub, and it's the AI in Higher Education webinar series, generally exploring generative AI's use in academia. Today, it's my pleasure to welcome Professor Sean Masterman. He's going to be talking about embracing AI in the classroom and industry. He's an adjunct professor with the College of Continuing and Professional Studies. I will let you know a little bit about Professor Masterman. So he got his doctorate in educational leadership and organizational leadership and a master of organizational management from Concordia University in St. Paul. He's been a technology leader for over 25 years, working with organizations like Target, Wells Fargo, Rollerblade, UCare, and Deepwatch. He's been teaching and designing courses for over 15 years at all levels of higher education. He's also very active in K-12 education, advising on programs and services in District 279. So with that, I think I'll hand it over to Professor Masterman to tell us about embracing AI in the classroom and industry. And welcome, everyone. And thank you, Sean.
Thanks, Jarvis. I appreciate it. Would you kick off the survey for me? So we're going to have just a quick 3-question survey. I just want to make sure that I understand kind of who the participants are, so I can make sure that I kind of tailor my talk to the group. So if you would just take a few minutes to fill that out, and while you're doing that, I'm going to tell you a couple articles that I saw this morning. So I was looking at Bloomberg this morning, and I saw 2 kind of seemingly unrelated articles about AI. So this first one that Bloomberg called the Great AI Upheaval was talking about within American companies the investment that they're making in infrastructure. So talking about over the next 5 years, they're going to invest $3 trillion. So the big hitters: Alphabet, Amazon, Meta, Microsoft. And they're predicting that they will spend 650 billion just this year, just in 2026. But the interesting thing that the article called out is that these companies really aren't answering, what is it for? What are they building all this infrastructure for? So it's almost if they build it, you will come. And then the second article that I saw was focused on Chinese, kind of the big companies in China. So Alibaba, Tencent, ByteDance, Baidu. So it's the Lunar New Year, and these companies are giving away billions in yen. So the estimate is over $500 billion that they'll give away to potential customers. And some of them are saying, hey, tell us how you would use my application on your phone. But ultimately, what they're trying to do is secure long-term loyalty, right? Because they see that, right now it's more of a generative AI world, but things are going to be moving more to AI agents, which are, handling everyday tasks. And so they want to build the customer base. They want to secure this customer base, effectively bribing them so that they can maintain that control. So, okay, so let's see. So Jarvis, do I need to so the first question, so it looks like we've got 26% are higher educators, 33% are designers or learning technologists, and then another 26% are industry. So then I will kind of balance it between both of those. Jarvis, how do oh, you can do the next question. You're on mute. There we go.
Yep.
Okay. So did we have people do question 2 and 3 or not yet?
I think they were going to launch as you close the results of the previous question. I guess I see
Oh,
question 3. I'm not sure, maybe they're out of order or something, but
Okay. Okay. That's fine. For the sake of time, why don't we move on and we can kind of gather some of these. If I guess if people want to respond, I'm not sure if question two came up, but if you want to respond to question three, I guess we can take a moment and talk about that one.
And sure, and Sean, as long as we have a second, let me just remind the participants here that at the bottom of your screen, you should see a button that says Q&A. If you do have questions throughout the presentation, please feel free to submit them. And then Sean will be taking, I guess, breaks occasionally throughout, or we'll have some at the end as well. So there's plenty of opportunity for you to ask questions as we go.
Okay. All right, so looking at question three, it looks like so 41% lack of institutional support is a concern. Another 41% fear of reducing academic rigor, 44% lack of own AI expertise. Um, so then 30% increased cheating or plagiarism. So great, we're gonna dig into those. Um, Okay, so we're gonna actually launch question two now. So please rate your comfort level, if you would. All right, great. So we over half of us feel moderately comfortable, use AI occasionally. That's great. That's a great foundation. And then 20% feel very comfortable. All right, wonderful. Well, that helps me kind of understand where we're coming from. Let me just get my all right, perfect. So looking at the current state of and actually hold on a second, I'm going to take a pause. Um, mm, okay, all right, all right. So the current state. Um, oh, click happy. All right, so in 20, I think this was 23. IBM laid off 8,000 employees because they were going to be replacing them with AI, only to have to, within 18 months, have to hire all of those and more employees back because of AI. And so this is a big thing that we'll talk about is that AI isn't going to replace humans. We're going to be partners working side by side. Oh, I guess I went the wrong way. Hold on. All right, there we go. All right, and then Challenger Gray and Christmas put this report out recently, looking at the job cuts, the layoffs, right? And so if we go back to um, um, there we go. If we go back to 2020, right, that was the last major layoff around the pandemic. There's another slide that I'll show that actually goes back to the recession, the 2008 recession. But you can see looking at 2025, 1.2 million people laid off. And a lot of the messaging coming out of companies was laying off for AI, like that IBM article. Um, and then this is coming out of the St. Louis uh, Federal Reserve. So this is looking a broader perspective, but this is looking at the unemployment rates of college graduates and high school graduates. Like, so if you look at kind of the browner line, you can see that it's only slightly above the college graduates that that are that are older. They've been graduated for a while. Um, or it's yeah. So I mean the difference with just a high school degree and people that have been in the job market that have a degree, have had a degree longer, the gap isn't that big. When you get to current college graduates, that gap is much bigger. And obviously, when you go back to 2010 with the pandemic, and then going back to 2008, there were spikes. The interesting thing, though, is if you look at those time periods, the bachelor degree, the people that had been established were less impacted, and it was closer with the college grads and the high school grads. So just kind of an interesting dynamic and especially now as we get, we're looking at college grads who are not sure that they'll be able to get a job. And so, just recently, Amazon announced that they were going to lay off 16,000 people, which is on top of their layoff of 14,000 people in October, which in October they blamed it on AI. With this latest one in January, they were blaming it on bureaucracy, trying to streamline your bureaucracy. So I think companies learned that blaming it on AI may not be the best approach. So now they're trying to streamline their levels. So kind of an interesting tact. But I expect that we'll see a lot more of this, right? More of reasons not related to technology. So Gartner, looking at education, has said that organizations need to look at supercharging their learning, right? So the digital trends are shortening the half-life of skills, right? And actually, what industry is even finding is that the competitive advantage is now 6 months or less. And so part of the strategy for organizations to remain competitive is they've got to be investing in their people. And so we'll get into this level, and it kind of says on the right side here, upskilling, continuously reskilling periodically. And so we need to look at, and from a higher ed perspective, I believe that we're going to be a piece of that puzzle. I don't believe that organizations will actually do all of this training in-house or will have the capabilities. Their learning and development groups won't have the skills to be able to provide their team members with both the technical and the human skills that they'll need. So going back over here, there's going to be net new differentiating skills, right? But the key thing is in the middle here. AI will be marbled through the roles within the emerging job market. So again, AI is not going to be replacing people necessarily, but it'll be part of the puzzle, part of how you're doing your job. And another big piece of what Gartner is bringing forward, and this is actually coming out of I think that's the Center for Creative Leadership, but really emphasizing experiential training, right? As learning through doing. And I'm hearing more and more from hiring managers. They don't want to know what a student learned. They want to know what they can do. And so this experiential learning gives them the opportunity to build their portfolio and show I can do this thing, right? So when I go into the workforce, I know I've done that before. I know how to do that. And so the Center for Creative Learning estimates that 70% of the learning is best handled by hands-on. And so Gartner is predicting that enterprises with superior learning are 2.7 times more likely to outperform their competitors. So when you're looking at it from a competitive advantage perspective, this human, the ability to differentiate the skills and things like that and adapt the skills are going to be a major piece of the puzzle. And so then the last piece from Gartner, the most successful employees in the AI era will be the most effective continuous learners. So how are we as organizations, whether it's at the university level or in industry, how are we helping develop our team members to be continuous learners? How are we supporting them in this journey? All right, so now let's go back. How did we get here? How did we, what got us to this point, right? And so a lot of it is tied back to the Industrial Revolution, right? Over 100 years ago, the models, the pedagogy models that we're using today are still grounded in this model for creating factory style workers, right? Workers that are comfortable with being compliant, that are rote learning, right? So that all goes back to that industrial revolution, right? The other struggle that we have, that change is difficult and it's slow, so it's hard to kind of break out of the way we've always been doing it, especially when you start to factor in graduation requirements, right? So from a person building the curriculum, particularly in the K-12 or even in higher ed, but definitely K-12. I mean, these curriculum designers are being required to look at the graduation requirements and build the material to support that. And the educators are, using that effectively as a script. And so again, it's built on these standardized testing. It's built on rote memorization. Um, and with this model, the educator is the sage on the stage, right? They're really controlling what the student learns. Though the reality is the designers are actually defining what the teachers are teaching, and so what the students will learn. And then the learner, the idea is they're just complying. They're just supposed to take in all this information. The other piece of the puzzle that I think is a challenge that we really need to look at is that right now there's an inherent disconnect between industry and education. And education, if we're going to build the future workforce, we need to be connected with industry to understand what is needed. And that's going to require us to change what we're teaching. All right, so where do we go from here? So I believe, and this was the kind of the focus around my dissertation was, we need to actually go back to how we're training our educators, really K through 12, but even beyond. How are we preparing them? How are we supporting them in educating the future workforce? And how are we supporting them to integrate technology into the classroom so that these assisted technologies can enable the learners? How can we shift to more of a project-based experiential learning model, right? How can we, so there's an education model that I'll talk about in a second called deep learning that focuses on more of that hands-on. And how do we shift the role of the educator from sage on the stage to guide on the side, right? To more of a mentor or a coach. So when I think about the future classroom, I see a lot of these changes happening. And from a technological perspective, as Jarvis said, I've been a technology leader for 25 years, so I've seen how things have evolved. But I believe that we are very close to a place where we could actually create individual learning assistants. So built on agentic AI and deep learning, these learning assistants could learn how the student learns. And so through this, they could personalize how the material is presented, personalize, how they're learning the material, right? So the idea is maximize the learning through the presentation, through the strategy. So my theory is that this personalization could actually eliminate the learning barriers, right? So by, a child that's on the spectrum or a child with attention deficit, you could adjust how the material is presented because the agent has learned how that student learns. So, and I believe that the future classroom is going to be built around more of this deep learning education model, right? Where the educator defines the what, right? They define the problems, they define the guides, and they're a coach and a mentor through the process. And then the students are organized into small groups where the students are focused on the how of the learning. And, this learning is problem or project based. So they're having to creatively solve problems based on their learning. And from a business perspective, right now we're seeing Gen AI in the workplace. But one of the big struggles in industry is that a lot of organizations haven't quite figured out how to monetize, how to make it effective. And so there's plenty of stories around what can be done, but organizations are really struggling to get that implemented. And two of the big challenges that they have when they that organizations have is when they did their digital transformations, or maybe they didn't, but when they did their digital transformations, they didn't take the time to fix their processes and they didn't take the time to fix their data. And so a lot of organizations are playing catch up because AI in the workforce is highly dependent, especially when you talk about agentic AI, it's highly dependent on efficient processes. Because I think everybody knows if you automate a bad process, you're just doing a bad process faster. And so you didn't really improve the organization or change the competitive advantage. And if you don't have good data, garbage in, garbage out. And so organizations really need to look at how they're doing that. The other piece of the puzzle is that a lot of these implementations are being relegated to the technology teams, and the C-suite is failing to recognize that this is a leadership implementation. It's not a technology implementation. It's going to fundamentally change how organizations operate. And so it needs to be managed at the C-suite level. And that's, when I talk about the upskilling and reskilling, these aren't technology skills that are always the focus. We need to be looking at human skills as well. So, we're right on the cusp of agentic AI becoming more commonplace, not only in the workplace, but also just in our lives. Um, one of the predictions that Gartner made is that everyone will have a personal assistant, an AI agent, by 28. I actually don't believe that we're far enough along that that'll be a thing, but it will be at some point. It is coming. And then within business, human computer integration. Not only working alongside, but actually using enhancements, computer enhancements to improve how the human is able to deliver. But then working alongside humanoid robotics. Um, Collaboration is going to be key, being able to work together. But the big differentiator for our students in this future workforce is their human skills, their ability to lean on those human skills that AI won't be able to do. They won't be able to bring to the table. So if we look at that, so I kind of see three areas for preparing the future workforce: the human skills that I just talked about, continuous learning, and experiential learning. And so when I'm thinking about human skills, and this isn't an exhaustive list, but when I'm thinking about human skills, I'm talking about creativity, critical thinking, communication, collaboration, continuous learning, empathy, strategic thinking, adaptability, emotional intelligence, trust, accountability, transparency. And so part of the challenge that we have is we're spending so much time on the technical skills, particularly within higher education. We're focused on the technical skills and we're not spending as much time focusing on the human skills. And so we really need to look at how are we developing these human skills as we're doing our technical skills. And I think a big part of that is the experiential learning. All right. So, as I'm researching, as I'm having conversations, it's become clear to me that we need a fundamental change in our pedagogy. And alongside that, we need to change how we're assessing learning. So right now, a lot of the conversations, and we kind of saw this in the survey, a lot of conversations right now are focused on plagiarism and cheating. And so a lot of educators are looking at how do I prevent the students from cheating? And so I'm hearing a lot of educators saying, well, I'm just going to go to Blue Books. I'm going to take the internet out of it. And, if I'm down on paper, then it's whatever they know in their head is coming out on the paper. And I will say, if you're looking at it from a purely defensive perspective, that is a strategy. But there's also a lot of concern around just decrease in the skills, creativity, laziness, right? And so that's something that we need to think about is how are we pushing our students to continue to build their creativity, to build their communication skills? How are we using our pedagogy to do that. And so I believe that we need a mindset shift, right? So I believe as educators, our responsibility, and actually, even in industry, as industry leaders, it's our responsibility to ensure that our students or our team knows how to use AI, how to use it effectively and how to use it ethically, right? But I talked about we need to shift our learning assessments, right? The learning assessments that came out of the Industrial Revolution are really just rote memorization and demonstrating that you can memorize things, right? Quizzes are not good strategies to demonstrate learning in an AI era. Right. So we need to look for more applied learning, right? So how are we, which is really kind of what the Blue Books are doing, but we don't have to do it in Blue Books, right? There's other ways to apply that learning, but take what you learned and apply it to a situation, right? Critical applications, right? Scenario based problem solving. How are you using it to solve a problem? So actually, I've been talking a lot. Jarvis, what do you have for questions? I should probably take a pause here.
Sure. We don't have any questions that have
Okay,
rolled in from the audience yet, so we could keep going, or I
just
could.
keep going. Okay.
Yeah,
No,
sure.
let's keep going. Let's keep going. Okay. So I will just take a pause and say, please, put your questions out there under the Q&A functionality if you have anything. I'm making and I'm going to continue to make some big statements. So please ask questions, challenge me. All right. So last fall, the U of M joined a national effort called the Student Experience Project, and invited faculty and staff to join this effort. And so I joined that last fall, and I'm continuing this spring with the project. But the premise is to foster a positive classroom learning environment. And focus around inclusion and confidence in skills and things like that. So the idea is that if you increase the student's likelihood, or if you can change the environment, you can increase the student's likelihood of persevering through academic challenges to graduation. So the Student Experience Project collected data in 2020 and 2021, and what they found is when the student classroom experience improves over the course of the term, they're more likely to earn an A or a B. That increased, and then the likelihood of earning a D, an F, or a W decreased. And so what we were asked in the fall was look at your curriculum. How can you make a change to improve the classroom experience? And then it used three surveys, one at the beginning of the term as a baseline, a midterm to kind of check the pulse, and then a final one to really gauge how the students are feeling as part of that classroom community. And so I joined that, and then looking at there's a couple other pieces of the puzzle here. So Dr. Tori Trust created a trust model which is focused around teaching with AI. So the first letter is transparency, and I've found with the assignment that I've got in my courses that's huge. Students right now are actually they're getting so much input around AI equals cheating that they actually are uncomfortable using it. And I mean, even in business, people are not necessarily sharing that they created something with generative AI. And so part of the piece of the puzzle here is transparency, making sure that you're really clear on the purpose, the value, the steps, how you want the students to do the work, and then real world applications. It's got to connect for the students, right? It's not just some out of touch case study. It's something that ties to their world and making them better prepared for the future workforce. Universal design. How are you reducing barriers, increasing engagement, which again is what the student experience project is about. And then social knowledge. We need to connect students in this. It isn't a student with Gen AI, it's students as part of a small group working with their peers. And so again, developing those human skills, and then trial and error, right? How are the students learning through iteration? And then obviously the feedback. So they're getting the peer feedback. And if we look at it from a Bloom's taxonomy perspective, right, you look at the understand and remember levels, right, the foundational levels for the rest of the taxonomy. Those are the areas where right now Gen AI is able to help students. And so from the assignments that I have built into this scaffolded assignment, they're using Gen AI to help them build some of their foundations. But the idea from a learning perspective is that Gen AI helps them lay the foundation, just like in this taxonomy. Understand and remember are the foundations that you're building from. And the idea is that once the students have the foundations, as educators, we should be pushing them up the pyramid, right? We should be pushing them to apply, giving them opportunities to apply that learning, and in unique situations, right? Not just a quiz, but in a unique situation, take what you learned and apply it, and then analyze, being able to draw connections between things. I mean, right now there's a lot of convergences, and there's a lot of connections, so I showed you with those two articles from Bloomberg, right? I mean, I made connections between those two articles that, may or may not be related. But the reality is they represent what's going on in AI right now. And then evaluate. When a student can actually stand up and justify, make an argument, own own that learning, that's an important piece of the puzzle. And then being able to take that and create something new, is really the ultimate piece. But again, AI has a place in the foundational levels of our pedagogy. All right, so the scaffolded assignment that I built. So within the IT infrastructure program of CCAPS, there's a operating systems course. It's one of the foundational courses that pretty much every student needs to take to be able to move through the program. And so one of the things that I wanted to do, because I'm a huge proponent in communication is critical. Even without AI, our ability to communicate effectively, not only in our everyday lives but in business, is critical. And I believe that when you're talking about global enterprise organizations, sometimes your writing is the only way that somebody will know you. And so your ability to effectively communicate in writing, I believe, is critical. So I wanted to build a scaffolded assignment, formal writing assignment that specifically partnered with AI on the journey so that the students would learn transparently how to partner with AI to build their final product. But I will say the emphasis for me is actually on the journey and less on the final products. And so I built this with the U of M's Gen AI and U program in mind, and I actually leveraged those materials as part of my lectures. So the lectures that I have as we're going through the semester, and by the way, keep in mind, I'm still teaching the technical knowledge around operating systems that are foundational for the students' success, but we're weaving in this additional learning to help them be better prepared for the future workforce. So the first lecture that I have is using GenAI effectively, so focused around prompting and critical review. So one of the things that I teach is the CRIT prompting model, where you're establishing the context for GenAI, you're telling GenAI what its role is, you're giving it the opportunity to ask you some questions through the interview step, so that it can refine what it is um, that you want them to help create, and then the final task. And then the other piece is there's a feature within GenAI called temperature that allows you to control the creativity level. And so typically it's on a level of 0 to 1, 0 being just the facts and 1 being creative. And so a lot of it depends on what it is that you're partnering with GenAI to create. So like if you're creating a thank you note for somebody, um, you know, you probably want some creativity. So typically in the work that I'm doing, I want the facts. So I'm giving it a temperature of like zero point 0.1. And so, people will actually go beyond 1. And so, you'll get kind of hyperbole. You'll get, oh my gosh, this gift is going to change my life. Right. You're going to get some very large statements from Gen AI, but that might be the message that you want. Or you could scale it down if it goes a little too far, right? But you control that creativity level. Um, and then the second lecture is around using Gen AI ethically. So we talk a lot about the biases that are built into the models, and then how do the students validate the sources, right? So I had a situation. I was teaching in the master's program at Concordia, and one of my master's students had a bunch of sources about the Amazon River when his paper was about the Amazon cloud. And so clearly the student had not taken the time to look at the sources. And the student even had in-text citations tied back to these articles. So clearly didn't know the articles, didn't know the research. And what was interesting is they were all valid research articles. They just had nothing to do with AWS cloud or Amazon cloud, right? Anyway, so and then the final message being the end product ownership. So Gen AI will help you build a foundation. It's a good partner to build a foundation, but the human has to step in and bring it home, right? And then part of what I introduce them to is Notebook LM, and I will just say highly encourage, if you have not explored Notebook LM, I would encourage you to opt in and play with it a little bit. It's amazing what Microsoft or what Google has built in there. But what they can do is once they've found their sources, they can actually put all those sources into Notebook LM, and then when they're doing their prompting, the prompting will be related to those articles, right? And so what I'm having them do is actually use that to help build their outline for their paper. And then the next step is how are they using Gen AI to build an effective paper, right? So, spelling, grammar, good tone. How are they getting the paragraphs to flow? How are they doing proper APA formatting? So those are kind of the lectures that I focus on. One that I've added this semester that's not on here is building an effective presentation. We're gonna talk about that as well. All right. So from an assignment perspective, from the scaffolding, again, it's partnering with Gen AI and with Notebook LM, which is really just built on Gen AI. But what I have them do is I have them submit their original material, whatever it is, kind of what stage. So like with the first one where they're picking their topic, they don't really have any original material, but as they move along, they will. So their original material, their iterative journey, so basically their chat. I want their peer feedback, and then the final product, how they used all of that, how they brought all that together to get to their final product. So again, last week our focus was on with this class was on building their topic, and and they were doing this in small groups so that they could compare notes with their peers. And so ultimately they submitted the iterative journey that they took with GenAI, as well as their peer conversation, and then their final topic. Um, and then what we're going to do next week will be focused on the sources, right? Looking at how do they find the sources that they'll use. So I require 8 to 10 sources, with at least 3 of those being peer reviewed. Though, we're looking at modern operating system topics, and so there may not be a lot of scholarly conversation around some of those topics. So, I work closely with a student on that. But then they're critically reviewing those sources to make sure that they actually support their topic. And then I talked about a minute ago the outline. So they're partnering with GenAI around building an outline. And actually, going back on the sources article or the sources assignment, I'm actually also having them submit their references. So they're using generative AI to help them based on all of their sources in Notebook LM, build their reference list, their APA formatted reference list. And so that's kind of their first opportunity to get feedback from me on do they truly have proper formatting? Are those articles actually going to support their journey? So the outline, using that to logically organize their paper, right? And then we move into, or we'll move in later in the semester into writing collaboration, right? So the student comes with some subset of a rough draft, whether it's their entire rough draft or a few paragraphs. They'll come with a subset, and they'll use generative AI to help with spelling and grammar, with tone. Are they building fully supported paragraphs? Is the reader flowed through those paragraphs? Are there good transitions, right? So getting into the mechanics of writing a good paper. And then the idea is that they're working with their peers to review their rough draft as well. And then the idea is they're bringing all of that feedback together, that in the end, the student owned rough draft. And so then I will take that rough draft and give them feedback. And then at that point, their journey with AI is over. And so then they're taking my feedback and peer feedback to create their final version, which is a student-owned version. All right. So when I talk about AI partnership strategies, right? So the idea is, and if we kind of flash back to Bloom's, it's those 2 lower levels, right? Let AI do those, help you with those. So I kind of frame that as, let AI do the routine and repeatable, right? But use AI as a thought partner. Help it be kind of a junior assistant to help you come up with your topic, right? To suggest better ways of framing your paper. But the key piece of the pedagogy is focusing on the uniquely human skills that are going to be critical for them in the future workforce. So what can you do today? As an educator, as an industry leader, what can you do? My recommendation is, find a problem and use Gen AI to solve that problem. And so fortunately, we saw that most of you feel relatively comfortable. So you might want to take it to the next level, but start to look at how you can solve a problem partnering with Gen AI. And part of what I've found from my experience is Gen AI will probably get you about 75 to 80% of the way there. And it's that last 20 to 25%. And by the way, the 75 to 80, it'll get you there in minutes. But the 20 to 25%, that's going to take you hours to get it finalized so it's your product. But invest the time, use it to help you solve a problem, either personally or professionally. But then look at how can we integrate technology, whether it's in the workplace or in the classroom? Where are those opportunities? And then look for ways to emphasize experiential learning, right? So, as the educator or as the business leader, you can define the what, but let your team members define the how of their learning. But again, take the responsibility to make sure that they understand how to effectively and ethically use Gen AI. Because part of the challenge that we have right now is, students and people in the workplace have been given Gen AI and said, play with it, figure it out. And so that's part of why businesses are struggling, is that there isn't a strategic approach. There isn't a cohesive way of capitalizing on that learning. And from a student perspective, in time they will eventually figure it out. But will it be effective? Will it be ethical? And so I believe that as educators, we have a responsibility to help them on that journey. And then make sure, kind of the last thing, make sure that your pedagogy is fostering the human skills. So alongside the technical skills that we're teaching, how are you developing the human skills as well? Come on. There we go. All right. So what do we have for questions?
So, thank you very much, Sean. That was very enlightening. We do have a lot of questions that have come in, and I'll do my best to
Please.
kind of distill them as best I can. But the first one
Perfect.
was when you were talking about Bloom's taxonomy. I think the question, I mean, I'm paraphrasing a bit, but I sort of share some of this
Yeah.
concern or maybe even trepidation. So the question basically
Mhm.
says, um, as the questioner understands it, the memory and prerequisites I'm sorry, understanding and memory are prerequisites to higher level thinking. So I don't know if you could maybe go back to the Bloom's slide um,
Yeah,
while
absolutely.
we're talking. So
Yep.
the idea, I guess, classically was that these broader base levels were foundational, and the question, I guess, is saying um, you're proposing that AI would take over those roles, like you said, the
Yeah.
repeatable and um,
Yeah.
but what about students that would not then have the foundational knowledge? So if they have to ask AI
Sure.
about basic facts, they might not be in a good position for fact checking and won't have the memory or the capacity or the familiarity to do the more complex things.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the key for me is, how do we get the knowledge in their brain? Right. So right now we're saying, here's a 1,000-page textbook. So for this course, it's a 1,000-page textbook that, oh, by the way, was written in 2015. The students are given this 1,000-page textbook, and it's learn this. Right. And I'll give you lectures every week of what I think is important, but learn this. Right. And my premise is that the learning, the memorization, the understanding comes through the hands-on, not through a lecture, not through the sage on the stage, but let the students. So like, for example, it may be more effective to actually let the students focus more on a summary of the material, right? As opposed to reading 100 pages in a chapter, right? Or 80 pages in a chapter, right? How much of that are they actually going to retain? But the hands-on actually allows them to retain it. So not only is it getting the knowledge in their brain through the hands-on, but it's actually having them apply that knowledge to solve a problem, to do something with it. And so that, as the Center for Creative Learning talked about, 75% of the learning should be experiential, not somebody standing in the front of the room and regurgitating the book to the student, right? That model is not an effective way to learn. And so my premise is we need to shift to more experiential so that the students are getting the hands-on. They're applying it, right? So they're taking the understand, remember, but they're in the classroom. They're getting to that apply level.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. So I guess in this sense, the next question dovetails a bit. This is with regards to the course outline you were talking about, the
Mhm.
INET
Yep.
4001.
Yep.
So the students undergoing this process, do they, I understand there's sort of iterations and such, but do they, or do you require any kind of formal or informal reflection on the process. So, do students produce the paper, or do they produce the paper along with some understanding of the process, or go back to refine? I mean, I guess it's kind of what we do in the scientific process anyway, but do you require that as part of the overall learning process?
So what I'm doing is that's happening in the classroom. So like what I'll end up doing is um the 1 week will be the lecture and they'll, in the classroom they'll apply that and then the next week we debrief on it. Kind of what were the takeaways. So just this semester, for example, last week we did the topics and the students really didn't talk to each other. So when I asked for the peer feedback, it was, yeah, Joe agrees with me, you know. And so it's like, okay, well, that really wasn't that effective. And so we talked about it last night around, okay, how are we how are we doing this more effectively? So there's kind of more of a debrief strategy, and kind of what my plan is next week when we move to the next phase, we'll talk about that a little bit more, and I'll actually my plan is to kind of circulate around and try to seed some of those peer discussions, support those peer discussions. So yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, thank you. There was another question about specifics on one of your slides. I guess I'll just paraphrase again a bit.
Sure.
Will you be willing to share the slides or kind of disseminate them among the participants?
Yep. Yeah, I think the plan was to make a link available for them. So I'm not exactly sure where that link will be, but yes, yeah, absolutely.
Sure. Okay, thank you. Another question, do you think that the SAGE on the stage will remain the predominant model of higher education in the US after at least a couple decades of pushes for active learning? I'm kind of trying to read between the lines here. Maybe we've been doing this in different contexts before. Do you think AI will dramatically change the paradigm at long last, perhaps?
Yeah. Yeah. So not to be controversial, but what I will say is that model, the Industrial Revolution model is easy, right? Quizzes, Canvas will automatically grade them for you, right? Standing up in front of a 50 slide deck and just going through it with the students, that's easy. The experiential is hard. And so, I mean, so that part of the reason that I built this talk is as educators and industry leaders, we have to own it. So, I mean, if the change is going to happen, we have to do it. We have to change it. And so, and from a curriculum design perspective, we need to, rather than just creating the same old course with updated material, let's evaluate how the material is being presented. And so we have to fundamentally change how we're doing it in the classroom. And if we don't do it, yeah, I don't think it'll change because the way we've been doing it for 150 years is easy. And this is hard, what I'm talking about.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, just a follow-up, I guess. One of the things that's hard about this is what is actually being assessed at the end of the day, right? I think that's maybe one of the challenges that we all struggle with AI is that
Yep.
it sort of moves the goalpost, so to speak. What are we actually
Yep.
trying to test? Do we want students to understand concepts or application? Ideally, it's everything. But
Mhm.
I mean, with that as kind of a backdrop, how do we integrate this and try to maintain some level of academic rigor? And I guess the follow-on question is, does the notion of academic rigor have to morph a little bit in this new paradigm?
That's what I was going to say is I think we think that if the students get good grades that that's rigor, right? Which is probably a whole other conversation, right? But I mean, getting back to the how do we assess, I guess I really look at the top of Bloom's taxonomy, right? If you've got a student that can take a stand related to their learning, apply their learning, and take a stand on it. Um, they learn the material. And more importantly, because I kind of talked about this earlier, we're getting a lot of convergence of not only technologies but ideas. And students need to be in a place where they're prepared to have those converging opportunity or converging conversations, right? They need to understand how these overlaps are going to impact the future. And then even beyond that, if they can take that learning and create something, you know, pretty much anything above those top two are confirmation that they learned. And what's best or what's awesome about it is that it's often real time where you can give them the feedback because if they didn't learn it, if there's a gap, you can help them fill in that gap. And so, um, but again, I mean, it's work. It's work doing that, and we have to invest the time, and look for how do we move students up this pyramid.
Sure. So thank you. I guess one other question is from your earlier surveys, it looks like there's sort of a spectrum of familiarity with AI. And I think we all kind of perceive
Yep.
that and all have our
Yep.
own different, maybe niche applications. But how can someone jump in on this if they don't themselves feel like an AI expert, right? In other words, how do you use this
Sure.
effectively without, um, maybe a lot of us, yeah, thank you. So there's a, 25% maybe
Mhm.
don't feel as comfortable as they perhaps would want to
Yep.
be able to launch into something like
Yep.
this. So how do we get there?
Yep. So the kind of like I had on my last slide, the first thing is start playing with it. Start trying to solve problems. But also, there are plenty of webinars like this where you can learn more. Um, but I will say, just to put a plug in, the Gen AI and you is, if you have not worked through that, I would highly encourage you to work through that. That they do a really good job of distilling down the information that you need, and supporting students in using Gen AI. It's a very approachable series that they have in there. Um, the other thing is, sometimes you just have to kind of get in the water, right? Just get your feet wet and start to. And so even if you're taking the journey with the students, so earlier I talked about how one of the challenges in industry is that the C-suite is relegating these implementations to the technologists, and they're failing to understand that this is actually a leadership implementation, not a technology implementation. And so the reality is, kind of the connection back to the classroom is, you are the CEO of your classroom, right? And so you control what that learning looks like. Um, and so start the process in your classroom, and take the journey with your students, right? Be a little vulnerable.
Sure. Yeah, thank you. I'm going to try and squeeze in one more question because it kind of comes full circle. You started
Please.
the presentation talking about industry demands and industry needs in a changing landscape. So,
Yep.
um, how can they help inform K-12 and higher education on how to change curriculum to better prepare students from their perspective?
Sure. Sure. Well, I will say that's a pretty big ecosystem. So, and that's actually part of what I tackle in my dissertation, is that, realistically, um, we need to be looking at it at a legislative level, right? So, as a citizen, how are we influencing our legislators that are representing us? Because fundamentally, from a curriculum design perspective, the K-12 curriculum designers really don't have a choice. They have to design their curriculum to meet the standards, the state and federal standards. And so if they're not, if the curriculum is not teaching the students to those standards, then realistically the designer failed, right? And so that's kind of, so part of it is we need to shift from a standards perspective so that it changes it. Now, I believe that there's enough wiggle room in K through 16 or beyond where you can change the what, right? And help the students, give the students the freedom in the how, right? So it doesn't mean that what you're teaching changes, but it's how the learning happens that changes. And so I think there is that freedom, but I think there is a significant legislative piece that needs to happen. And then from an industry perspective, it's how are we shifting the emphasis within the workplace, right? Is it are we just, the promise of AI is going to lead us to lay off, like in 25 1.2 million people, or do we understand that it's going to be marbled in, like Gartner said, and so we need to be focused on upskilling our people. And then at the K-12 perspective, just kind of making the change now. There's plenty of opportunities within districts to be able to be part of advisory committees, to try to influence what's happening, become part of the school board. You can directly influence there. So I guess I would say look for opportunities to make a difference within your little world.
Well, thank you very much, Sean. I guess it's fitting to sort of end on a paraphrase of a Gandhi quote, right?
Yeah, exactly. I
But
was going to
but
say,
this
be the change you want to see in the world. Yes,
right,
exactly.
yeah. Well,
Um,
thank you.
so yeah, so
Go
really
ahead.
quick here, if I can get my mouse to cooperate. Um, Let me get to the end here. So within this deck, I've got all the references. So if you want to dig deeper, feel free. But the other thing too is I've got a QR code. If you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, if you want to have more of a conversation, please do. I love connecting with people. Um, I love having this conversation. So feel free.
Great. Thank you very much, Sean. And
Yeah.
thank you all who attended, and thank you to the IT support and the organizers, and especially to the participants who stayed a little bit after for the kind of engaging and enlightening Q&A. So hope you all appreciated it. And again, thank you for coming, and thank you again to Sean for sharing his time and insight and wisdom with us.
Thank you. Appreciate it.